Good morning and welcome to Broker Briefing, Australia's premier digital platform for brokers and investors, live streaming video presentations from ASX listed companies. I'm Jane Morgan and thank you for joining me today for our March Biotech and Nutrition Investor Webinar, live streaming across Zoom, YouTube, brokerbriefing.com, Twitter and Facebook. Today we'll be joined by four companies: Argenica Therapeutics, Nutritional Growth Solutions, Emyria Limited and PharmAust. So up first, we are joined by Argenica Therapeutics with the ticker code AGN, a company developing novel therapeutics to reduce brain damage after stroke. To tell us more, I am joined by CEO and MD, Dr. Liz Dallimore. Hi, dear Liz, thanks for having us again.
Hi, Jane. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Great. Let me just bring up your presentation.
Thanks. Great, thank you. So thanks everyone that's joined online. As Jane said, I am Liz Dallimore. I am the CEO and MD of Argenica Therapeutics. Next slide, please. So just a quick one on disclaimer on forward-looking statements in this presentation. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you a quick sort of snapshot of Argenica, who we are and what we are looking to do. So we are developing novel neuroprotective therapeutics. So these are drugs that are able to protect brain cells following injury. So we're predominantly looking at indications in ischemic stroke. So this is a stroke caused by a clot in a blood vessel in the brain. Ischemic strokes make up around 85% of all strokes. We're also looking at indications in traumatic brain injury and concussion, in infant stroke or HIE, and also in chronic conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. But really, as a company, what drives us is being able to positively impact the lives of these patients. There are currently no neuroprotective drugs on the market that are able to protect brain cells following these types of acute and chronic injuries. So whilst impacting patients' lives, we are unlocking huge commercial opportunities in these large unmet needs. So really exciting time for the company and some really fantastic catalysts coming up. Next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot of where we're at the moment. So we currently have just over 8 million cash in the bank as of last quarter, and that doesn't include a $1.2 million grant that we received from the federal government to progress our research in traumatic brain injury and concussion. We have completed a phase 1 clinical trial. I'll go into a little bit more in the presentation and what that means for the company. But we're sitting around 35 mil market cap so for going into phase 2, it's a pretty cheap market cap, so a good time to buy. Next slide, please. So just a bit more on our lead drug candidate. It's known as ARG-007, and it has been in development for over 10 years at the Perrin Neuroscience Research Institute and the University of Western Australia here in Perth. We have over 25 peer-reviewed publications on how that drug works, predominantly in stroke, but also in TBI and HIE. We've got further preclinical data not published in other indications as well. We have completed our phase 1 clinical trial, which shows that our drug is safe to deliver to humans, which is a huge de-risking aspect for a drug development company such as our own. We own all the IP outright within the company, and we have patents granted in multiple jurisdictions, including key markets that we're looking to commercialise the drug into. Next slide, please. So why are we going after stroke predominantly? So stroke is a huge issue globally. 1 in 4 people will suffer a stroke in their lifetime. I think some people think that that's only reserved for older people, but more younger people are having stroke. And we are actually at least seeing the incidence of stroke going up post-COVID, which is really concerning. And of those people that suffer a stroke, only around 10% of them will recover fully. And that's because of the extent of brain cell death that you see post-stroke because of that lack of oxygen that the brain is receiving due to the clot in the blood vessel in the brain. So there are currently no therapies available that are able to protect those brain cells following stroke. And so Argenica has a huge opportunity to tap into that large unmet need and the huge market in stroke. Next slide, please. So just quickly on stroke, in terms of how we fit into standard of care. So when doing drug development, it's really important that you develop your drug so that it can fit nicely into the current standard of care. So when someone has a stroke, there's really little that the paramedic can do by way of triage. So the aim is to get that patient to hospital as soon as possible. So that they can be scanned to determine the location of the stroke, the type of stroke that that patient has, and then work out the best way to try to remove that clot if possible. But all that time, all that delay results in increasing amounts of cell death in the brain, which leads to worse functional outcomes for these patients. So what we're aiming to do is to be able to deliver our drug in the ambulance to stop that amount of cell death, stop it in its tracks, and buy that patient time to get to hospital. Next slide, please. So we've got some really compelling preclinical data. So this is data that we've published in a non-human primate model of ischemic stroke. And we've shown that our drug is able to reduce that amount of cell death in the brain post-stroke by 66%, which is better than our nearest competitor, NA1, which is currently just completed its second phase 3 trial. And what's really important is that even though we're only delivering a single intravenous injection of our drug, that protection is lasting out to 28 days. So that patient, they're not getting any further increases in brain cell death, which is really important. Next slide, please. So as I said, we've got really encouraging results to date. We've shown in preclinical models that our drug is able to significantly reduce the amount of brain cell death. We also know that it's safe to administer in the field by paramedics. It doesn't exacerbate bleeding or lead to any hemorrhage. We haven't seen any adverse effects in our phase 1 clinical trial. And we also know that our drug can be administered with the current treatment regime that stroke patients receive, including clot dissolving drugs. Next slide, please. So just quickly on the phase 1 trial, so we did recently announce our final safety data from that trial, where we saw no clinically significant adverse events at all within any of the doses delivered to healthy participants. Interestingly, we actually saw more sort of mild minor adverse effects in the placebo group. So we know that our drug now is safe to deliver via IV infusion into healthy patients. And so now the plan is to move into a phase 2 clinical trial to look at not only the safety of our drug in stroke patients, but also to see how much and the extent of reduction in that brain cell death that we're getting from our drug in stroke patients. Next slide, please. So just the timeline for that. So there's a few things to work through to get into delivering our drug into stroke patients. So the main one is ethics approval to be able to undertake this clinical trial in a number of stroke care units in Australia. But ultimately, we're looking to be dosing our first stroke patient by the end of this calendar year. So we're just working through that process at the moment, developing the protocol, writing the ethics application to get into patients. Next slide, please. So we really do see, as I mentioned before, AWST as a technology platform. Because it works on multiple mechanisms of action, the high positive charge of the drug itself lends itself to a number of other neurological conditions. So we've progressed quite far in hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. This is a reduction in blood flow to the brain in newborn infants. So it can result from preeclampsia, cord wrapped around the neck, or complications during labour. And these babies have quite dire outcomes. So it can lead to severe cerebral palsy, severe learning difficulties, and cognitive dysfunction. So we've got some really compelling preclinical data in that, and we're progressing that indication into clinical trials. What's I guess good from a drug development point of view in HIE is that it is also a rare disease. So we will go for orphan drug designation to be able to accelerate those clinical trials in those patients. We're also, as I mentioned, looking at severe and mild TBI, so that's also concussion, and have the federal government grant to progress those studies, as well as cardiac arrest and neuroprotection following cardiac arrest. And we've recently released some data around Alzheimer's disease, so I'll come to that. Next slide, please. So quickly on the HIE data, so what we've found is really exciting data in a term animal model. So term meaning 37 weeks and beyond gestation. So we're getting an 86% reduction, which is quite significant in these animal models at our 300 nanomole per kilogram dose of ARG-007. So the next step in the HIE is to do it in larger animal models and then put in for an investigational new drug to start clinical trials in that indication. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we've got data in vitro model of Alzheimer's disease. So we're showing again a significant reduction in beta amyloid. So beta amyloid is it's a protein that aggregates during Alzheimer's. So it's one of the markers of Alzheimer's disease. There are other markers such as tau aggregation, neuroinflammation, but this is sort of the first step in our journey to proving that our drug could be a potential therapy in Alzheimer's disease. Again, we've recently received a grant to be able to progress animal studies in Alzheimer's to collect further data in that indication. Next slide, please. So I am supported in this journey by a fantastic team, board and management team, which is they've all got experience in either capital markets or drug development. So fantastic to have them all on board and help me through the process. Next slide, please. And as we go into our phase 2 clinical trial in stroke, I have some of the world's heavy hitters in neurology. So in particular, David Blacker, who has run a number of stroke trials, chairs our clinical advisory committee. Dr. Jeff Saver out of UCLA is the man to go to. He's run the most phase 3 clinical trials in stroke globally. So absolute fantastic to have their advisory and their support as we move into the phase 2 clinical trials. Next slide, please. So just to wrap it all up, why do we think Argenica is a fantastic investment at the moment? We have significantly de-risked our drug asset in terms of preclinical data. 25 peer-reviewed published papers. They're available if anyone wants to dig into the science, more than happy to send them to you. At the moment, we have a really strong balance sheet to lead into the phase 2 trial. We've de-risked our asset in humans, healthy humans, in our phase 1 clinical trial with no adverse events seen. And we've also got multiple shots on goal here. So not just stroke, but really exciting data coming through with other indications. And as I said, able to access grants and supported by a fantastic team. So I hope you've enjoyed the story. We're really excited about the next 12 months ahead and looking forward to sharing the news as it comes to hand. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Great presentation as always. A couple of questions, so I'll jump into them. So what are the current drugs in the market that provide a similar solution, and how do they compare?
Sure. So there are no neuroprotective drugs in the market at the moment. So it is actually quite a hot area. So there is the one that's probably closest to market is that one that I put on the slide, NA1, that is being developed by a Canadian company called Nono Inc. They have just completed a second phase 3 trial. However, they cannot deliver their drug with the clot dissolving drug. So slightly more challenging. So they're going after a smaller subset of patients than we are. All our preclinical data, we compare our drug to their drug, and we do see greater efficacy in our drug each time. So, and then there's a few others coming through the pipeline. I'm actually in the US next week to meet a few of these other companies and the FDA to work out how do we accelerate these drugs onto the market.
Well, thanks for that, Liz. That actually leads into my next question. So when will the drug likely be commercialized?
So we have to do the phase 2 trials, obviously. So we expect recruitment to be around 18 months and then final data package, so 6 months later. So 2 years for a phase 2 trial, and that will give us some indication of efficacy of the drug. And then we do have to do a bigger global phase 3 trial. So that's probably another kind of 3 years. But you know, we're always talking to companies around, you know, potentially partnering. So I guess the commercialization for us as a company could be a deal post phase 2, and then, you know, let another pharma company sort of push and pay for the phase 3 and get it onto the market.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Liz. That's all we've got time for today. But I would encourage webinar attendees to reach out via the contact details on the bottom of the ASX releases if they've got further questions. But thank you again.
Thanks, Jane. See ya.
So up next, we have a presentation from Nutritional Growth Solutions with the ticker code NGS, a company focused on nutritional products to support growth development in kids. To tell us more about their products and the US expansion plans, today I'm joined by CEO Steve Turner. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Jane.
Let me bring up your presentation.
Wonderful.
When you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. So Nutritional Growth Solutions, we are a kids nutrition company. So next slide. This is our customary forward-looking disclaimers. So encourage you to read that. It's been published. So this is our current corporate snapshot. We recently updated it to reflect our share price improvement over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, typical look at what the company looks like. So next slide. Want to really speak to essentially the highlights. I was recently appointed CEO by the board, just actually a few weeks ago. And we're really trying to capitalize on our successes in the US. So our product is currently available in Walmart. We're actually available nationwide, currently in 408 doors, soon to be 465, starting in May, and really looking at how we can use that retail expansion and our successes with our sales performance so far in Walmart as a catalyst for growth as we continue to look for additional retail expansion. We'll continue to basically capitalize also on opportunities in other markets, look for both strategic as well as distribution relationships. One of the nice things that we're working with is the fact that we actually have a product line that's based on a variety of different intellectual properties that stem from the Schneider Children's Medical Center in Tel Aviv, Israel. So we have a patent estate that currently consists of 6 patents. We have a composition of matter as well as method of use patents and a variety of different aspects that really are high horsepower behind the formulations that we're marketing. And our margins continue to improve as we sell more and more in our retail and our online channels. Really just unlocking that growth. Next slide, please. Everything that we stand for, our mission, values, and beliefs really stems from the work that was done by our founding medical team and the research that continues to go on at Schneider Medical Center in Tel Aviv, Israel. They see a large number of children with a variety of different growth disorders. And really what started our journey in our core formulation that goes back to the beginning, the catalyst or the need that was driving the development of the product was trying to find a nutritional solution for those children that didn't qualify for growth hormone therapy, children that had challenges with growth and development disorders, failure to thrive, among others. And that's really where we started. So to date, if you go forward to our next slide, everything that we stand for, next slide, please, is really trying to fill those nutritional gaps. And so whether it's a true medical need or really just the anxieties and underpinnings that we all have as busy parents, vast majority of the kids in the world actually just don't have that quality of diet necessary to provide them with the building blocks they need in order to thrive. So if you go to the next slide, really what we're doing is essentially demonstrating, obviously in this particular clinical study that's one of many, that nutrition really is an important aspect. That 80% of what we become is genetic, but 20% really is environment in the food that we provide ourselves to grow and develop. And we fall prey, at least in the US, to treating our kids like mini versions of adults, but in reality, they need so much more. They're building connective tissues, organs, and so on and so forth, as well as trying to grow and thrive. And so it's hard to make sure that they have the necessary resources that their body needs. Next slide, please. So when you look at our market opportunity, what's really great about our approach is we have a variety of different opportunities, and our family of products really falls at the center of the intersection of a variety of different large markets, whether it's infant formula and toddler feeding, food and nutritional supplements, as well as the food for medical special purposes. And that's really what we're trying to capitalize on. Next slide, please. When you look at our portfolio that we've been able to develop just over the last year, it's pretty significant. And where we started was our Grow Daily 3+ line, and we've evolved that to be a family of products that, regardless of the age or gender of your child, we're able to put an offering in place in order to basically eliminate those concerns of nutritional gaps at all the key stages of growth and development between the ages of 2 and really 18. But our sweet spot is really trying to impact some kind of improvement between 2 and 16 years of age. Next slide, please. I was appointed recently. I come from a history of consumer products, starting off on actually the drug development side of consumer products with fancy formulation technologies, and moving my way through a really OTC small molecules as well as dietary supplements since the late 90s. Been both involved in accelerated filing public companies, so I understand the needs of making sure that we're meeting shareholders' expectations, as well as basically building and launching a variety of different verticals over the years. So next slide, please. I'm really excited about being able to capitalize on what we've accomplished over the last year. So the US for our company has really been the big success, sort of the star in our portfolio, and gives us a lot of ability to really continue to grow and meet the needs of people around the world long term. So we've really done a lot to be able to secure the world's largest retailer and to have a partnership relationship with them, such that we've been able to continue to demonstrate that we not only belong on shelf, but we belong in more stores as we continue to work down that pathway. But we've also been able to collaborate with them and launch new and innovative products into different categories that, once again, just provide us significant opportunity to generate additional revenues. Next slide, please. You know, when you look at our growth strategy for the year, it's really built on the underpinnings, the foundational revenues that we get from our e-commerce platforms. So the Amazon and our direct web store sales are important because it's near-term revenue, near-term cash flow that allows us to then fund our efforts in retail. So strategies are going to be to continue to leverage our successes and maintain or increase our sales growth velocity as far as getting product off shelf and meeting that consumer demand. That will lead to an increase in stores, which of course just allows us to unlock significant potential. Continue to expand our product lines in order to basically make sure that we have more than 1 or 2 items on shelf. That's represented with our entry of the Happy Tummies, which will be on shelf in September, Q3, Q4 of this year. And then, of course, leverage our success at Walmart to bring other retailers to the plate. Ultimately, our long-term goal is to get to about 70% of top line being physical brick and mortar store sales, with only 30% of it being e-commerce sales as far as North America is concerned. And of course, continue to basically make sure that we're present and in front of the consumer so that our household awareness continues to grow, and we actually can leverage that brand equity in other markets. Next slide, please. To kind of give you an idea of what Walmart really represents, it's tough, especially if you're not familiar with how Walmart and how retail works in the US. Interestingly enough, this slide is already out of date. Walmart's annual sales last year was actually 600 million, so nearly double what we're representing here. But the importance is to see the magnitude of what they represent compared to all other channels of business. Of course, Amazon is where we launched our brand and launched our company in the US back in 2018. And when you look at being able to leverage with what Walmart represents for us, it's a significant opportunity. Next slide. This is actually meant to illustrate really the difference between what can happen with us already basically working with Walmart. So we're already on shelf. The chart on the left is really meant to illustrate what can happen just by changing store count, as well as continuing to increase our sales velocity off shelf. We're currently actually selling beyond a sales rate of 1.2. And what that means is actually we're moving 1.2 units or more across the doors that we actually have distribution. That's actually well above what the initial expectation is, and we're seeing that increase week over week. So as we continue down this path, store count will increase, and as we get stores, we actually get the benefit of pipeline infill as well as the incremental sales, and it actually moves pretty significant exponentially as we go through this journey. On the right, this is really meant to illustrate what happens as we increase our SKU count, or the items that we have on shelf. We currently have 2 items on shelf in the toddler feeding space, and we have a 3rd item coming, which will be our new Happy Tummies digestive nutritional supplement that we co-developed with Walmart that's coming in September. So we're literally already sitting on a business that actually has 3 items. And then as we continue to demonstrate success, we'll be able to unlock additional items on shelf. So both of those are expected to happen in the near term. Next slide, please. So realistically, it's just making sure that we have the tactics internally in order to support the growth. And we've done quite a bit over the last year and a half to dramatically change how we engage with the end consumer. So we've done a nearly 100% overhaul of our agency partners and our tactics that we're using in order to basically shift from being a medical need, a clinical space, sort of talking to that heritage, but using that as part of our conversation and doing more to engage and generate sort of an emotional play. Emotion is really what's going to move the needle for us. And when you see how we've evolved our tactics and strategies over the last year, you really see the net results of that. So our conversion rates have gone up exponentially. Our ability to basically talk to a larger audience, basically upper funnel tactics, is much larger. But more importantly, our cost of acquisition has continued to improve, but we're lengthening the time at which we're engaging with consumers to generate sales. Next slide, please. So obviously our business model continues to be flexible. We have licensing activities that we've done in the past and will continue to pursue. We have the ability to leverage our intellectual property because of what's behind the formulations and work within a distribution model, but as well as just building on our business to consumer, direct to consumer sales, both e-commerce as well as physical in store. Next slide, please. So our achievements and growth for the year, obviously we've already achieved a fairly significant opportunity by getting on shelf at Walmart. That began tail end of last year. Realistically, that clock has started ticking for us in October. We also entered into a distribution agreement with Poland, and we've already seen significant growth in our sales velocity off shelf with Walmart. That's going to lead to additional expansion of store count, as well as future expansion of additional items going on shelf. And we'll be able to leverage that success to be able to drive additional interest with other retailers and continue to build our footprint as we go down this journey. We have expectations and efforts that we're putting in place to be able to actually enter into the Australian market, both in independent pharmacies, but also layering onto that through our export Amazon global model that will allow us to do direct FBM, or fulfilled by merchant, sales of product to Australian consumers, and look at other opportunities to be able to do the same thing in other geographies. Also, not to minimize it, but we entered into a clinical study for, yet again, a further expansion within our range. We have a formulation that's being tested in youth athletes that will actually then bolster our ability to continue to expand our portfolio so that we have a variety of different segments to be able to cater to, most importantly, child athletes. Next slide, please. So really, when you look at our 3-pillar strategy, again, it's product, proliferation of those products to make sure that we're meeting individual needs and opportunities and segments in the global market, continue to expand our global presence as well as our sales channels. Thank you. And I believe that's the last slide. There you go. Any questions?
Thank you, Steve. Great presentation. There's been quite a few, so let me jump through them.
Sure.
So is there an opportunity to sell through Walmart stores outside of the US as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's one of the things that we're working with. Walmart's made a pretty aggressive push most recently into Latin America and Mexico, and they actually have a Walmart Centro AM group that are 900 wholly owned Walmart stores within Central and Latin America that we've already begun discussions with, but it's a longer play because the registration that's going to be required in each of those various territories takes time. But over time, we do expect to be able to leverage essentially Walmart's footprint globally.
Thank you. And with the current cost base, what sales level will create a break-even EBIT, and neutral cash burn?
Really, so our business, when you take out some of the bets that we were making in order to sort of capitalize on other markets, realistically is between 5.4 and 5.6 Australian. And when you look at what we're already doing and what our plans and expectations are just for US, we do expect to get to that break-even point this year. And then when you layer on the other opportunities and that unknown element of how quickly we can see a pretty significant ramp up in store distribution, obviously that just moves the needle further forward.
Thanks, Steve. You touched on this earlier, but so with NGS currently targeting other major US retailers, when will we see customer diversification to address the customer concentration risk?
Well, right now, we've already been engaging. So one thing to think of with the retail market and really how retailers think in the US, they think out 9 to 12 months in advance. And so we're already actively in discussions with a variety of different retailers. And there's opportunities both in the short term and long term, and fully expect to be able to capitalize on what we're doing with Walmart to then diversify our retailer portfolio. Interestingly enough, that portfolio, again, is also going to sort of build on what we've already done online. And so I fully expect that we will see at least 1 or 2 additional retailers, but that will be a fourth quarter event, likely at the earliest, just because of the cycle and how they think.
Thank you. And just finally, so how long does product development take and where is it undertaken?
Well, interestingly enough, product development actually can be very quick. One example is with the Happy Tummies development that stemmed from conversations that we had with Walmart directly when I was involved in their open call event last summer. And we went in a short period of months to be able to go from initial wish list concept all the way to finished goods. And now it's just a matter of basically managing the front end as far as the manufacturing lead time in order to get on shelf and in the distribution channel. So it's fairly short. It's fairly low risk. We don't do any of our own manufacturing. So we basically leverage capacities and capabilities with our contract manufacturing providers in order to do this as quickly as possible.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for that, Steve. That's all we've got time for today. Again, webinar attendees should use the contact details on the bottom of the ASX release if they've got any further questions. But thanks again.
Thank you. Cheers.
So next, we have a presentation from Emyria Limited with the ticker code EMD. Whoops. Sorry. Did that work? Sorry, yeah, here we go. So sorry, I'll kick off again. So next we have a presentation from Emyria Limited with the ticker code EMD, a company that uses industry-leading data collection to find solutions to unsolved medical problems. To tell us more, I'll hand you over to our Managing Director, Dr. Michael Winlow.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning or good afternoon, and pleasure to speak with you all today. As Jane mentioned, EMD is a drug development company. We're tackling some of the world's most emergent and serious challenges in mental health and neuroscience. We're using some of the most innovative molecules to tackle those diseases that are showing some real promise, but which lack the usual evidence. And we are approaching this by also being heavily involved in the frontline care of patients, which provides a chance for us to get health outcomes, but also learn from those patients and take those learnings into our drug development programs as well. And so we have really 4 shots on goals. We have 2 leading cannabinoid, ultra-pure cannabinoid programs that are pursuing late-stage clinical studies and approaching commercialization. We also have a number of assets and approaches in the MDMA therapy space, both the establishment of a leading network here in Australia to deliver MDMA-assisted therapy for patients with severe treatment-resistant PTSD, but also setting up that network in order to learn from those patients as well and take that data to support the generation of next generation MDMA analogs to support these challenging conditions as well. A couple of highlights about our company. We have the support of 10 Mile. This is Andrew Forrest Private Wealth Fund investment group. It's a subsidiary of Tattering. They have been great supporters of our company and own about 8% of the register. We're pretty tightly held with the top 50 holding more than 70%. We work with novel proprietary formulations of ultra pure. This is lab-based synthetic CBD to create our drug development programs. And we also have this interest in MDMA analogs, and we believe we have one of the world's largest libraries of unique chemical compounds inspired by MDMA with huge therapeutic potential as well. And I'll take you through those programs in detail in this presentation. First of all, we're tackling related conditions to anxiety and tackling our CBD programs forward against these indications. Generalized anxiety disorder is the #1 mental health condition in the world globally. The last few years have been really challenging, and we've seen the incidence of this condition only rise. Nearly 80% of patients who are on treatment for anxiety suffer some side effect of their medication as well. So there's a real need for a safer treatment with fewer side effects that's also really effective. We're tackling this at both ends of the spectrum here. We have low-dose CBD, which we're pursuing for over-the-counter registration for mild symptoms of anxiety. And we also have a high-potency prescription strength CBD program that we're taking forward that we believe will have potential for prescription anxiety-related disorders as well. We're also backing that program up with an interest in the MDMA space, and we've been preparing for this for a couple of years. The recent rescheduling of MDMA by the TGA, a world-first move to recognize MDMA and psilocybin as having therapeutic potential, has really accelerated this program for us. And so we're moving quickly to establish a leading national network of psychiatrists where we can provide MDMA-assisted therapy for patients with treatment-resistant PTSD. But we want to do it in such a way that we are really thoughtful. We're learning from patients as we go, and we're taking that data towards novel drug development as well. And because MDMA is such a versatile molecule, it interacts with many different areas of the brain, we have the opportunity to tune its selectivity and elicit different kinds of therapeutic responses, which we believe can help us tackle conditions like the symptoms of Parkinson's treatment and others as well. So we're tackling multiple billion-dollar opportunities with some really unique innovation, and we're being guided by the data we're gathering from patients while we're caring for them, which makes us a really unique biotech company. So here's our model kind of laid out in a high-level structure. We've been caring for patients under the subsidiary of Emerald Clinics for some time. We've treated more than 8,000 patients, as young as 2, as old as 100, more than 40 different clinical indications. We've studied those patients closely, and that data is what's guiding and informing the drug development and the clinical trial program for our ultra-pure cannabinoid medicines. We're also establishing the same kind of model, leveraging our insights from Emerald Clinics to build a psychiatrist-led network to provide MDMA-assisted therapy to patients as well, but at the same time, paying attention to how those patients are doing, using that data to inform novel drug development and care model innovation. We believe we can generate revenues as well as insights in doing this. And why is real-world evidence so important? Well, when we first IPO'd 3 years ago, we would give the quote that 45% of FDA approvals had some kind of real-world evidence accompanying them. This is the evidence that's gathered outside the clinical trial environment. That number shifted to 78%. It'll be close to 100% within a few years. And this is in recognition that clinical trials don't look like the real world. And so the results of clinical trials, as compelling as they might be, don't often translate to the real world health outcomes. And so people are interested, regulators particularly, in how does a drug perform with real patients, with all of their complications and nuances. And so we're really been very focused and invested in gathering that data. We have an exceptional board that's done this kind of work before. A couple of highlights here: Professor Sir John Tuke, ex-president of the Academy of Medical Sciences, knighted for services to medicine, an ex-advisor to Google DeepMind, has been a key advisor on our board, setting up our learning health system. And Dr. Karen Smith in the top right, a biopharmaceutical executive based in the United States, chief medical officer, ex-chief medical officer, and global head of research and development at Jazz Pharmaceuticals, a notable company in our industry because they acquired the only cannabinoid registered medicine in the world to date. That's Epidiolex for $7.2 billion back in February 2021. And she's very interested clearly in the way we're approaching our drug registration programs. So as I alluded to, Jazz Pharmaceuticals paid an enormous amount of money for the only registered CBD drug in the world. It's currently generating more than $1 billion a year. It's a CBD oil. It treats a rare form of epilepsy, and it came to the market after a huge investment of time and effort and many clinical trials to achieve its FDA registration. So we know that there's a commercial upside if you can have a properly registered performing CBD product. The challenge today is we've been sort of flooded in Australia, especially with CBD products that are largely undifferentiated, where the quality is not quite there, the potency is variable, and almost none of these products have performed the clinical research required to obtain registration. And so there's a gap here, and we are tackling that gap using really good data gathered from our clinics, using those insights to make make pharmaceutical grade synthetic CBD products that we believe are registrable, and then we're putting those products to work in clinical studies, guided by our real-world evidence, of course, to achieve registration and large commercial returns and big patient impact. And we're focused on the anxiety disorders. Why is that? Well, that's where our evidence and also the published literature presents the most compelling case for where CBD has a benefit. We know that there are product limitations and shortcomings, which we're addressing in our program. And so we have both an OTC program and a prescription program tackling that space. We know our OTC, our solid oral dose form, is really performant. We've gone head to head with Epidiolex, that billion-dollar medicine. We know we can deliver equivalent amounts of medication, but we have less variability. We have a slower release profile. We have really favorable clinical advantages and features which we think will make this a very attractive and successful over-the-counter product. And then those insights also support our prescription program as well. The OTC program's in phase 3 studies. It'll due to conclude in July. We will have a clinical readout a few months later, and targeting mild symptoms of anxiety and stress in patients with pain, but then big opportunities after that successful registration to expand our indications, to expand our global markets at each step, being informed by the clinical evidence we've already gathered on many thousands of patients from our clinic. We also have a prescription program, a very high potency, high bioavailability dose form of ultra pure CBD as well, and targeting a number of prescription indications for that program. And so now you can see we are kind of bookending anxiety. We'll have an option over the counter for mild anxiety. We'll have prescription program for the more serious anxiety disorders. And also I should note, we have the support of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, who are funding a preclinical screening program for pain for this EMD-RX7 program as well. They were compelled by our synthetic preparation, the registrability of that dose form, the patient preference of a solid oral capsule, and also the compelling real-world evidence that we had provided to them that demonstrated that cannabinoids could make an impact in opioid use amongst patients with chronic pain. So that's a fully funded, very sophisticated preclinical program that's running at all costs to the NIH. So the next 12 months looks like this. We are in advanced commercial discussions for the OTC program. We'll conclude our trial in July. We expect to have TGA registration and the clinical efficacy readout following conclusion of the study, and then readouts from our preclinical program with the NIH playing alongside that, and also preparations and the commencement of a phase 1 study for the RX7 program as well. So lots to look forward to on the cannabinoid front. And that's half our story really, and I'll go through quickly on the MDMA front, but the TGA changed the rules around psilocybin and MDMA just a few weeks ago, recognizing these previously illegal drugs as having therapeutic potential. They handed the keys to specialist psychiatrists, the only group allowed to prescribe this medication. And so also insisting on the development of a care plan, a monitoring system, reporting processes, and properly trained therapists in order to give this treatment. So I won't spend much time going deeply on MDMA, but just to point out that it is a compound with some really unique qualities. It greatly releases or increases the release of serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline, which results in increased feelings of compassion, sociability, alertness, decreases fear and defensiveness. And those qualities have made it a very attractive party drug, but also an incredible adjunct to psychotherapy, particularly for things like post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what people are seeing in these really difficult to treat patients with PTSD are incredible clinical outcomes in major phase 3 studies. In fact, there's been 2 of them completed in the United States with a group called MAPS, who've really pioneered research here to show that 80% of patients will have a clinical significant response. Nearly 2/3 of patients have a full remission from their PTSD symptomatology after just 3 intense sessions. But MDMA-assisted therapy is difficult to deliver, requires a lot of therapist time, up to a full day per patient. The sessions last a long time, and there's quite a lot involved in doing it as well. So we see this as an opportunity for Emyria to take our learnings from our Emerald Clinics experience, our drug development capabilities, and actually work on really bringing this therapy to patients who need it through the establishment of a national network, but also working in the background to make improvements to MDMA itself so that we can actually produce faster acting MDMA and MDMA that may have fewer unwanted side effects. So we can see ourselves as having a coordinating function here, teaming up with groups like the PAC Center, Complex Trauma Specialist Group, providing drug supply, which we've already secured, developing the care plans, taking care of the data and monitoring infrastructure. In exchange, there is a revenue opportunity, but also importantly, a data generation opportunity that can support the novel drug development program that's coming up behind it. And so that program is done in partnership with the University of Western Australia. We're taking MDMA as inspiration. We're making structural changes. We're getting different kinds of effects. We're tuning the selectivity of that compound, and we're seeing huge potential for a range of neurological disorders, and one in particular I'll pay attention to. So just a few slides to go. One of our goals is faster acting MDMA. It would be very valuable to have an MDMA that was as potent, but came on more quickly and subsided more quickly as well, allowing therapists to perhaps turn these sessions from 8 to 12 hours into 2 to 4 hours. So you could actually double the number of patients you see, potentially have a safer outcome as well. So there's a massive commercial interest and need for a faster acting MDMA. We're starting to see that we can actually break down MDMA much quicker than MDMA itself, showing proof of concept that it is possible, likely, that we can make a faster acting MDMA. The second space we're playing in is really, really fascinating, and that is based off this anecdotal finding that patients with severe symptoms from Parkinson's treatment called L-DOPA-induced dyskinesia can have a remarkable improvement in that symptom with the addition of MDMA. So here's a video that I'm playing now of Tim Lawrence. He's a stuntman from the UK who has severe Parkinson's disease and has a lot of side effects from his L-DOPA treatment, the most common treatment for Parkinson's. About 80% of patients will develop the symptoms that Tim's displaying on the left here, which is this jerky, shaky movements of the arms and legs. These are uncontrollable, involuntary movements that can appear 80% of Parkinson's patients who take L-DOPA. And so what Tim discovered one Friday evening was that when he took MDMA at a party, all of those jerky, uncontrolled movements subsided, and he had smooth muscle control once again. And so really, really fascinating discovery that's since been sort of replicated in others as well. And so what we're out to do is see whether we can remove the high. Let's remove some of the amphetamine effects and the euphoria, but let's preserve some of the important motor control features that MDMA can provide. And the early discovery work is starting to show that is possible. And so here's some clinical data readouts from one of the earlier compounds in this family, UWA 101, showing to improve that smooth movement by 30%, which is huge. And we know that there are commercial drugs out there that now have PBS coverage, expected to generate $300 million a year just in the United States, that improve that on time by only 6%. So we know there's a commercial precedent here. There's demand for a drug that can do this even more effectively, and we believe we've got one of the very best candidates in that space. I won't sit on this one too long, but let you know that we've got multiple families and tackling some really major unmet needs. What to look forward to on the MDMA front, particularly the analog space, after the establishment of the network. On the analog front, more compounds, growing the library, preclinical screening, selection of our very best lead compounds in preparation for IND-enabling studies and phase 1 trials. So here's us in a nutshell, tackling some major unmet needs, mental health and neuroscience, each of them billion-dollar opportunities, using some of the most innovative compounds that exist. And some of those are in pretty advanced stages, including our CBD program already in phase 3. We're got a really favorable reg environment with the changing of the TGA rule, which opens a pathway for registration and reimbursement for our analogs. And we also have a substantial preclinical pipeline coming up behind the scenes and an excellent team with FDA approval track record to support us through. So thank you for your time and attention. I welcome any questions.
Michael, thank you for the great presentation. We've had a few questions, so I'll jump into it.
Sure.
So what would a transaction in the USA with a major partner look like?
Yeah, I guess it depends what program you're talking about. On the MDMA analog front, there is a precedent of preclinical assets selling for large upfronts, big royalties, and milestone payments as well, particularly in neuroscience and in mental health, and that's the space we're playing in. If it's on the CBD front, I think it's more of a distribution licensing agreement, again, with upfronts and some milestones based on commercial outcomes with a royalty attached to that. And they're the kinds of transactions that we're we're contemplating and exploring.
And Michael, I know you touched on this through your presentation and you've got a very exciting year ahead, but you might just maybe reiterating to the attendees on the expected news flow that you can that they can look forward to over the coming months.
Yeah, great to summarize that. Clearly much to keep an eye on here, but on the cannabinoid front for the OTC, it's commercial partner, conclusion of the trial, TGA submission, approval on that front. On the prescription CBD program, it's readouts from the preclinical program of the NIH, our phase 1 program, and then pre-IND initiation registration. On the MDMA front, 2 things there. We want to be ready for the first patient July 1st when the new rescheduling comes into effect. So getting that network ready to treat patients and be ready to go. And then on the analog front, readouts from the preclinical program and selection of our lead assets.
And just on that then, so what excites you most about the company?
Well, I guess we get the real privilege of seeing some, frontline real patient outcomes and benefits from the clinical work that we do and working with our clinical partners. That's tremendously motivating and obviously keeps us energized. But I'm particularly intrigued by MDMA and where it can go next. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of what's possible for that molecule. It's been under-researched because of its illegal status. It's small, it does fascinating things in the mind. And I think it's giving psychiatrists particularly a completely new toolbox for tackling, some of the most serious and challenging conditions of our time and for problems which for a long time have really had terrible, options, to be honest. And so this is very, very exciting on that front.
Wonderful. Michael, that's all we've got time for today. Again, if webinar attendees do have any further questions, please feel free to reach out via the contact details on the bottom of the ASX releases. But thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
So next up, we have a presentation from PharmAust with the ticker code PAA, a company focused on clinical stage drug development, targeting cancer therapeutics for both humans and animals. To tell us more, I'm joined by Executive Chairman, Dr. Roger Aston. Good afternoon. Oh, Roger, are you there? Things might have lost Roger. Just give me a moment. Let me see if I can track him down. I apologize, everyone. Bear with me. Oh, we've got Roger here. Hello, Roger. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So we're a bit delayed today.
No, that's okay. Look, I'll pull up your presentation. We can jump straight into it.
Sure thing.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so PharmAust is repurposing a veterinary drug, which is an antiparasitic, and is targeting cancer with it. And could we go to the next slide? We're targeting a number of conditions: canine cancer, neurological disorders, and human cancer. Next slide, please. So how do you go from a sheep drench to the treatment of motor neuron disease in man and human veterinary cancers? This really boils down to a professor who brought the drug from his hobby farm to his research laboratories in Sydney and showed that the antiparasitic was effective in some 40 cancer cell lines. And it's history from there. We picked it up after that and licensed it from the hospital and the university, and have been pushing ahead with development and reformulation. As you can see, it's not a drench It's a tablet that we've produced, and we're in trials both with neurological and cancer. Next slide, please. So the drug itself is called monopantel. It's an antiparasitic. It's given as a drench to sheep and so on. And we've basically taken this and identified that it also has activity as an anti-cancer drug. So it's a safe and potent modulator of the mTOR pathway, which is central in metabolism and cell replication. And influencing metabolism is, of course, key to cancer activity, which is usually a matter of out of control cells. Next one, please. The mechanism of action is called mechanistic target of rapamycin. It's a central pathway and key pathway for influencing cancer growth and metabolism, neurodegenerative diseases, and even viral activity. Today, the global mTOR inhibitor market now exceeds 2.5 billion. Next slide, please. Why MPL? Well, the drug is already registered in 38 countries and by the APVMA in Australia. Substantial time and cost savings by going for an already registered drug because somebody else has underpinned the toxicology and biochemistry of the drug. Very low toxicity provides a significant advantage over existing mTOR antagonists for the treatment of oncological diseases. So this is really a rather unique product in the sense that it interferes with the mTOR pathway, but is not immunosuppressive, so it can be used in a different way than other mTOR drugs. It also crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is why we're looking at neurological conditions. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. And next slide again. Current options for people with canines which have developed B-cell lymphoma are either euthanasia within 8 weeks of diagnosis, or going on to chemotherapy. B-cell lymphoma has been our model system for the canine product, which we're developing and seeking to register soon. Entering this market is really a matter of bridging the gap between early euthanasia in dogs and the risk of A&Es and chemotherapy, which is called CHOP. Next slide, please. So typically what happens with canines with B-cell lymphoma is they present and they put on prednisolone almost universally, which gives them 60 days for the owner to decide whether to euthanize them. We add MPL to the prednisolone and we increase median survival to 147 days with excellent quality of life. And if you look at the chemotherapy, the CHOP bar, you can see that the pricing is really very high. It's $10,000 plus per course of treatment. And for over 100 days of that 345 days for median survival, you are busy treating the dog with chemotherapy, which has its own sets of disadvantages. Next slide. So we're weighing up the benefits of monopantel against CHOP or chemotherapy. If you look at the left-hand side of the balance, you can see that if you treat your dog with CHOP or chemotherapy, pregnant women and small children have restricted access to the dog. The chemotherapy can be between 4 and 6 months intensive treatment. And there's, of course, typical potential side effects. On the other hand, on the other side of the scales, we've got quality of life, which is our principal strategy with canine cancers. A simple daily oral tablet, which is not chemotherapy, so it can be handled from the home. Safe for pregnant women, safe for children, and normal family pet interactions, which you don't have with CHOP. Next slide, please. So in combination with prednisolone, MPL has provided an average extension of median survival of 21 weeks with excellent quality of life. Next slide. So now we're engaging with global veterinary companies for licensing. And the reason we've emphasized now the cancer applications in vet is because, of course, the drug is already registered for vet and is being sold for vet. So transitioning it to canine cancers is a lot less work. But also, it's a good stepping stone to go into humans. Typically, what happens in canines also happens in humans. Most of the drugs that we give our dogs when they get cancer are the same drugs as we give our patients in hospitals. So a licensing deal would mark a significant commercial outcome for us, and this is currently being explored with a number of companies. Next slide. We also have been working on neurological disorders. Next slide, please. And in particular, MND, which is a group of diseases which are listed below. We are aiming to block the attack of motor neurons, which destroys the connections between the brain and the motor muscles, the skeletal muscles, such as for walking, breathing, speaking, and swallowing. So we're running a trial at the moment in patients in both Sydney and Melbourne, where we're showing that, or where we're investigating the drug in slowing down the development of MND. Next slide, please. The first approved treatment for MND was riluzole, and it became available in 1995. It's believed to extend survival by only 3 to 4 months, with many side effects. Despite this, riluzole is already reaching $1 billion in sales annually. We believe we can target this disease. Next slide, please. Next slide. Australia's largest MND charity reviewed our properties that we have demonstrated for MPL and its performance in cancer and awarded PharmAust $880,000 to clinically evaluate MPL in MND progression. PharmAust expects that MPL will be an antagonist to mTOR and slow down the production of misfolded proteins, and hence reduce localized inflammation and associated motor neuron damage. Next slide. So in conjunction with Macquarie University, New South Wales, and Calvary Healthcare, and the statewide Progressive Neurological Disease Service in Victoria, we've treated a cohort of 6 patients for a period of 28 days. All of the patients, interestingly, elected to remain on the treatment after completion, which bodes well for safety and practicality of the drug. Cohort 2 has commenced screening, and we're hoping that we'll be able to push through the cohort 2s, 3 and 4 reasonably quickly. Interim analysis of cohort 2 completion to determine prognostic and MND outcomes. So we're doing an interim analysis to explore whether we're having an impact on the progression of MND. Next slide. So the next step is to move into human cancers. We have already got interest out of the US from an investigator who's prepared to evaluate that. We have done a trial in human cancer a number of years ago, and that was at the Royal Adelaide Hospital in Sydney. We know we're active in cancer, as you've seen from the canine data. And if we can go to the next slide. So strong data from the aggressive B-cell lymphoma in canines suggests positive correlation will translate into humans. We'll examine the value of MPL in at least 1 human cancer in 2023. And if we go to the next slide. I think I'm going to push on to the next slide again. So we've got 2 upcoming catalysts for the product. One of them is the completion of the interim analysis of the MND trial. The other one is a corporate outcome with the vet cancer product. Finally, yes, please, the next one. That's the team. Thank you.
Roger, thank you for the great presentation. We've had a lot of questions come in, so let me jump into it.
Right.
So, have patients had any impact on the speed of canine and various human trials?
Sorry, I missed that.
have the patents had any impact on the speed of canine and various human trials?
I don't understand the question. Say it again.
No, that's okay. Sorry, we might actually just head on to the next one. I think that was a little bit confusing, actually, in fact. So are you pacing the trials to coincide with patent expiration dates?
Oh, yes. We've got new patents on our product since we acquired it. So the runway we've got is between 10 years and 20 years at the moment. And the owners of the drug filed their patents back in 2001, 2002. So they're all expiring at the moment. So we're ready to go.
Wonderful. Next one come through. So are all the patients from the first cohort of MND trial still taking MPL, and how long has the longest patient been taking it?
They're still taking MPL, and it must be about 2.5 months now since they've been taking it. So it's good news. It's always good when the patient takes the drug and wants an LX to stay on it for as long as possible.
Thank you. Next one. So what will a typical licensing deal look like with an animal healthcare company?
Typically, we've got two options. Either they'll buy the veterinary business out. It's a big, canine cancers are a big market. They're about $500 million a year. We love our dogs. And we expect that, possibly a buyout, but there's also the potential of a license agreement where we'll get upfront payments, milestone payments, and a royalty at the end of the day.
Thank you, Roger. Another one that's popped up. So when will cohort 2 be fully recruited for MND?
Soon, I hope. we have to wait for patients to be screened and sign a consent form to join the trial. So we've already recruited some. I hope we've informed the market of that, and we'll continue recruiting. I can't give a date.
Well, Roger, there's another one that's popped up. It's not a question, but just a quote from Michael. So he said, "My dog is enrolled in this canine trial, and he can attest to the accuracy of the company's assertions. So he's got a fantastic quality of life," which is a great testament to what you're doing there.
Well, that's what it's all about with dogs. You don't want a dog that's sick.
Absolutely. Well, Roger, that's all we've got time for today. Again, webinar attendees can reach out via the contact details on the bottom of the ASX releases, but we look forward to hearing further updates in the near future.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today. Recordings of today's presentations will be available online in the coming days on both brokerbriefing.com and YouTube. We look forward to hosting you again soon.